All right, Ben, should we talk about our boy Pete Hegseth?
The Secretary
Pistol
of War.
Pete.
Yes.
I can't say Secretary of War. It makes you feel so stupid.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we're living in the stupidest timelines.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we have talked a lot on the show about the administration's airstrikes on these boats in the Caribbean and in the Pacific Ocean. So Trump says this is part of a war on drug cartels. He calls them narco terrorists. In practice, the U.S. military is just murdering people who the administration claims are drug traffickers. They don't really know. 83 people in 21 airstrikes, to be exact. But a new report from the Washington Post now has members of Congress from both parties demanding more detail about this policy and asking whether Pete Hegseth himself is guilty of war crimes. The specific incident they are focused on was the first one of these counter-narcotic strikes that happened on September 2nd. It killed 11 people. At the time, remember, Trump put out this brief clip of the airstrike on Truth Social. He said the people killed were Tren de Aragua narco terrorists. And then a few days later, The Intercept reported a bunch more details about the strike itself, specifically that the boat had spotted the surveillance drones following them, turned back towards shore, and then the U.S. military hit them anyway with a first drone strike that didn't kill everyone on board, and then a second strike killed the remaining survivors. So the Washington Post reported that Admiral Bradley, who at the time was the head of Joint Special Operations Commander, JSOC, ordered that second double tap strike because he had been given a verbal directive from Pete Hegseth to, quote, kill everybody. So, Ben, just to be clear here, I believe that these airstrikes are illegal no matter what. So it's weird that we're kind of debating whether the double tap strike is illegal. But even if the whole thing was on the up and up, ordering a second drone strike to kill defenseless people floating on wreckage is a war crime.
It's a war crime.
It is in fact shooting at defenseless sailors after a U-boat strike was the textbook example of a war crime from World War II. So the law says basically when a soldier is hurt or sick or surrenders or is rendered defenseless, it's a war crime to kill them and you have to rescue them. Initially, the Pentagon denied the story. They called the Post story fabricated, inflammatory, and derogatory. Then on Sunday, Trump got asked about the report.
A lot of big words to those guys.
A lot of big words, a lot of syllables there. And so Trump gets asked Sunday, and he's like, I guess I believe Pete, but also I wouldn't have wanted that, not that second strike. Then Monday, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, reads this prepared statement that says Hegseth authorized the strikes, but then she pointed her finger down the chain of command at the head of JSOC, Admiral Bradley, and said Bradley was, quote, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed. And then later on Monday, Hegseth tweeted about Bradley saying, quote, I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all other since. So some very subtle finger pointing from Pete there. On Tuesday, Ben, Trump and Hegseth were asked about the strike at a cabinet meeting. Here's some of what they said.
President Trump always has our back. We always have the back of our commanders who are making decisions in difficult situations, and we do in this case.
Pete didn't know about second attack having to do with two people, and I guess Pete would have to speak to it. I can say this, I want those boats taken out, and if we have to, we'll attack on land also.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision. I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand.
I hear Colombia, the country of Colombia, is making cocaine. They have cocaine manufacturing plants, okay? And then they sell us their cocaine. We appreciate that very much. But yeah, anybody that's doing that and selling it into our country is subject to attack.
So not necessarily just Venezuela?
No, not just Venezuela, no. We're taking those son of a bitches out, yeah.
Just learned that Colombia is manufacturing cocaine. So just to try to put a button on this long sordid story. So previously the administration said the second strike was necessary to get rid of a navigation hazard and sink the boat. Then they said it was self-defense because I guess these two people floating in the water are going to take out a Reaper drone or whatever is floating above them. We should note that the New York Times reported out a slightly different version of events after the Post, which is that Hegseth ordered a strike to kill the people on the boat and destroy its cargo, sink the vessel. But he didn't say, if there are survivors, kill them too, which is an important distinction just in terms of criminality here. So let's pause there, Ben. I mean, how much trouble do you think Hegseth and Bradley are in here, and how subtle did you find his attempt to point the finger at his subordinates?
So that to me is the headline of this whole thing, is that they know they got caught committing murder.
Yeah.
They are acting like people that are guilty of murder because they are.
Yeah.
And Trump is furiously distancing himself from this. I wouldn't have taken this shot. I had nothing to do with it. Hegseth furiously, after posting snuff videos and chest pounding about these boats. Oh, I didn't, the commander did this, but I back up the commander, but I had nothing to do with it. I walked out the room. I had another meeting. The whole world is watching video evidence of a war crime. And it's a sign too that even Pete Hegseth, not the, Pistol Pete's not the sharpest guy that we've had in the job, is aware that he's going to have a life after Donald Trump is there to protect him. This is becoming an increasingly common thread with this group, that they're aware that there's some accountability that may be on the horizon for them. Now, let's just pause and go back to the core issue of why these strikes are wrong. They're illegal, right? Even if they don't do the double tap strike, there's no domestic legal authorization for this. We've talked about this. There's no act of Congress. Even if you didn't like the drone strikes, as we've said, there's an act of Congress authorizing use of force against al-Qaeda. There is no such domestic law authorizing use of force against drug traffickers. Under international law, there's no imminent threat posed by these boats, right? The hundreds and hundreds of miles from the United States, trafficking maybe cocaine, but they're not, providing any evidence of this. Maybe that could go somewhere else too. It may not even come in the United States. So this is just, there's no legal basis for any of this. The reason that the double tap strike is a particularly egregious war crime is because when people, I think the people driving the boats to begin with are not exactly posing a threat, but when people are not fighting back and they're at risk and they're trying to surrender, they're not putting up a fight, you are obligated to capture those people, to help those people even. And we went through this, by the way, in Gaza, why you can't just blow up whole buildings, right? And for people who don't think those are important, I just go through the few reasons. Number one, it's wrong to just kill people when you don't need to kill them. If you're fighting in a war, if you're on the front line in Ukraine and you're trading fire, that's legal use of force. If you're there's vulnerable people hanging onto a boat and you kill them, well, that's just wrong. And those people could be innocent too. But secondly, if you needed another reason, that should be enough. Our troops, U.S. troops, depend on these laws. If these laws go away, how would you feel if it was American troops with their hands up, trying to surrender, getting double tapped and killed instead of being captured and ultimately exchanged or released to their families, right? So our military has traditionally been a huge proponent of following the laws of war, particularly in circumstances when people are trying to surrender, because they know that there have been times and there will be times in the future when those will be Americans. So this is wrong morally, it's wrong legally, it's also wrong for our national security, for the security of our troops. If these laws of war are just out the window, it's going to come back and boom, the chickens are going to come home to roost, to quote the former pastor of our former boss, And so it just, to me, so many threads come into this story, because there's the abuse of power, then there's the why are we there and the regime change piece in Venezuela that we'll get to. And then there's also, remember the fact that this is why they're at war with Mark Kelly, because the Democrats in Congress were telling those service members, hey, if you commit an illegal act, if you were ordered to do something illegal, like kill these people in a double attack strike, you could be held accountable. You don't have to do that. You follow the Constitution, not an illegal order. And so a lot of things converge in this story. It's why it's a really big and important story.
It's a big and important story. And clearly those 6 members of Congress made that video because they knew about this incident, right? This was the first one of these strikes, remember. And Hegseth is such a preening fuck that he had to go on. He went on Fox News the day after, was bragging about how he watched it live and how he was personally engaged and he knew all the intelligence. But everyone, I remember talking to people you and I worked with in the Obama administration, in the days after that first strike, who were saying to me, there were 11 people on that boat. Why would you have 11 people on a drug runner boat, right? There was probably some human trafficking. There's probably innocent people who may have been those survivors. And like you said, the whole policy is illegal, full stop. There's probably a legal difference for Hegseth in terms of his future and culpability between him saying you have the authority to kill everyone on that boat, with him being kill everyone on that boat, or seeing survivors and being kill those people. But again, this is all greatly complicated by the fact that he watched this live, I guess. And then just bigger picture, Pete Hegseth is so obviously trying to fuck over his direct reports, the head of JSOC at the time. And that is just not going to go over well at the Pentagon or really anywhere in the military. Like the buck is supposed to stop with him. He's the leader.
These people, by the way, that guy, I guarantee you, I don't know anything about that guy. That guy is not a Democrat, the
right.
commander of JSOC.
Yeah.
Just going to go out on a limb,
No,
right?
no.
So but this is going to be a problem for them because, one, those people know that they might face accountability. But two, I mean, you and I were talking offline about this. Imagine if Barack Obama went out and just blamed, down the chain of command. They are going to start to run into a challenge. I mean, I remember this, every administration comes in and their highest moment is the first day, right?
That half day too.
That half day of inauguration where
Yeah.
everybody's kissing your ass. It seems like you're going to be there forever. It seems like you can do anything. Everybody wants a job, so they're being really nice to you. And that capital just diminishes throughout the time that you're in office.
Yep.
Donald Trump is trying to buck gravity by talking about how he might run for a third term. He's not. The guy's old, right? We're going to be through. We might go through some shit here with the midterms and whatever happens. I'm not suggesting it's gonna be easy.
Can't stay awake through a cabinet meeting.
But the point is that these soldiers and SEALs and special operators and FBI agents know they're going to have a life after Trump, and these fuckers are just passing the buck for all the crimes that they're committing down the chain. That is going to create some real tensions inside the military.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they were so thin-skinned about that video, because the people like Jason Crow and Mark Kelly and Alyssa Slotkin, they know that.
Yes.
And so that hit the target.
Yep.
The reason they freaked out like they did, and they're trying to court-martial Mark Kelly, is because they know that they're speaking directly to people that are listening.
Absolutely right. Yeah, just a few other things. I'm sure, like me, you went deep on this policy debate after this, Hegseth story posted. I hadn't realized that the Washington Post reported that the White House initially asked the CIA to conduct these drone strikes on the boats through its covert action authorities, but the CIA's lawyers were like, I don't know that there's any possible self-defense argument, and they didn't want to do it. And then Stephen Miller wanted to be able to make the snuff films public, which sort of belies the whole idea that you would do it covertly. So they passed it over to DOD. And the Post also reported that the deputy director at the CIA had to become the acting general counsel and then be the one who ultimately approved CIA's participation in the policy, because the career lawyers were, again, this is crazy. This is just murder. And so, Ben, to your point about Admiral Bradley, between this strike and today, Admiral Bradley was promoted from the head of JSOC to the head of U.S. Special Operations Command. So they're now pointing the finger at him and being like, he is the one to blame. If you're going to, Congress, if you're going to, call someone up to the hill, it's that guy. But they loved him until a couple days ago when the Post reported this story. And then, I think you and I talked about this at the time. On October 6th, there was another strike that had some survivors. Those survivors were picked up and then returned to their home countries. They weren't even prosecuted. So clearly they were shaken by this first strike. They knew they did the wrong thing, and they changed the policy going forward. And that is also reportedly when Admiral Halsey, who's the head of Southern Command, who's retiring early, got in some big fight with Raisin Kane, Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I think about this policy maybe about this question of survivors. And now he's leaving only a year into the job, I think with the end of December. There's just lots of interesting data points in the public domain that have shown smoke and fire along the way about the problems here.
Yeah. And if you have no, again, credible legal basis, which they have not even presented, domestically or internationally, and then you have a video of people being killed after the strike had already hit the target, that's why they had all the meetings, because they already knew they were on a shaky legal basis. You already had lawyers that reportedly had said no to this, right, at multiple agencies, because they also got rid of the JAGs, the lawyers of the Defense
Cleaned house
Department,
early
right?
on.
Cleaned house there. So they already knew that they were on pretty tenuous footing, in part because Stephen Miller wanted to make the snuff videos, right? So this is their own hubris coming back on them. It's always hubris that brings people down.
Yep.
Clearly, the flurry of this activity, flurry of these meetings, but what they can't change is the fact that they killed those people, and that there's video evidence of those people being killed. And that's never going to go away no matter what they do.
Yeah.
And the rats can scurry off the ship here, not to be a little too, but we all know what we saw, and we all know that they can't explain why it's legal. And that's why they say, by the way, the other thing I want to point out in that clip you played, then they pivot to like those sons of bitches, this kind of dehumanizing bravado bullshit. When Donald Trump's not a tough guy,
No.
Pete Hegseth, like, give me a break, they hide behind that because they have no argument to make for why they're blowing up these boats.
Yeah, and I do think in that clip too, Hegseth kind of showed you who he really is. I mean, remember, this is a guy who spent a lot of time defending someone named Eddie Gallagher, who was a Navy SEAL who was accused by his own men of horrific war crimes, just like sniping innocent kids. And Hegseth like put a lot of political capital into defending him. Also, Ben, I saw Senator Rand Paul, Republican, posted a letter from the Coast Guard that said between September 1st, 2024 and October 7th, 2025, Coast Guard vessels interdicted 212 suspected drug smuggling vessels at sea headed towards the U.S. 41% of them had no illicit contraband on board at all. I'm not sure if contraband means drugs or like anything the Coast Guard deemed illegal, but either way, at least 20% of these boats had no drugs. So if that is the error rate with these drone strikes, that's pretty bad.
We're just murdering, if that's the case, and we don't know because they provide no evidence. We were just killing potentially like fishermen, or people just on a boat. And look, then when you challenge them on that, Trump says, "Oh, there are not any boats to hit anymore." Well, guess what there is? There's still fucking cocaine in the United States.
Right.
Like, what did they end drug trafficking?
No.
Like, these boats are achieving nothing. Other than a big show that Stephen Miller and Pete Hegseth like to put on X, and seem like tough guys.
Yep. So I'm glad Republicans and Democrats in Congress are both outraged. Hopefully we'll have real hearings, real investigations. Of course, like Pete Hegseth posts this like Franklin the Turtle meme of like a turtle firing a machine gun. Like, he's just a moron.
I didn't know that. Do you think that? I wonder if this stuff is starting to wear thin even with some of their own people, because it's the Franklin the Turtle thing, which is just thirsty.
That was not a good swing, sir. No one knows that.
But this is why he was the weekend anchor at Fox and Friends.
That's right.
The guy couldn't even carry the fucking weekday.
No, he was too drunk. Thank you for watching this excerpt of Pod Save the World, the show I do every week with Ben Rhodes about national security and foreign affairs. If you like the show, please subscribe to Pod Save the World. Also, please subscribe to Pod Save America. We're trying to build a YouTube empire here. And when you subscribe, when you like, when you comment, when you tell your friends, it helps us get this information into the algorithm and get people political news that isn't right-wing garbage.